What's up, guys? Today I'm going to talk about Bob Backland. I'm just beyond angry that at some point, I don't remember when in the 2000s, these smart marks decided they were going to focus on Backland and try to disrespect him and thought that shit was funny. I think that the premise was these assholes believed that he had some sort of mental or emotional problem or maybe even cognitive issues. I don't know what fucking world that's funny, you fucking oafs. But there's nothing funny about Bob Backland. These same punks and smarks and idiots that were laughing like someone actually followed him around Orlando studios and said, oh, look at him, he's getting a hot dog. Oh, look over there, he's getting a snow cone. Making fun of the fucking guy. That is one of the most money-drawing son of a bitches in the history of pro wrestling. That is one of the toughest real shooters in the history of pro wrestling. He held the belt for an unimaginable amount of time. And also, there's a lot of old-timers that they don't goof on Backland, but they're resentful at Backland and say, oh, howdy doody, he didn't draw. Let me ask you a question. If he did resemble howdy doody, which he did, he does, that would make him fucking more believable to drew the kind of money that he drew, wouldn't it? Okay, Bob, I'm going to go ahead and consider a friend. I worked with him at TNA Wrestling in 06 to 07. Some point in there, the drug stuff came out again. Drugs in wrestling, steroids in wrestling, drug testing in wrestling, wellness in wrestling. Dixie Carter went before Congress, did not do herself any favors because when they say Ditsy Carter, she really is Ditsy fucking Carter. And she buried herself further. Now, she got lucky. Whatever Congress people that wanted to get involved in the issue about drugs and wrestling and pain meds and wrestling and steroids and wrestling either gave up or weren't elected again, and nothing happened. There was no follow-up. However, it scared the shit out of Dixie and her people who knew nothing about wrestling, honestly nothing about business, no common sense, and came from Old Miss, and that was about the only thing that they were qualified to do or qualified from. Decided they want to go ahead and implement, or at least talk about implementing, a wellness policy for TNA, Total Nonstop Action Impact Wrestling talent, and it was just all a dog fart. They didn't mean anything about it. They didn't take it seriously. It was, in fact, myself and Bob who got together to start that thing off with Terry Taylor to do some drug testing. And once the smoke cleared and Dixie wasn't afraid anymore and she got the approval or okay from legal, she just blew it off, But Bob was legitimately concerned about the next generation, the guys coming up. And, you smarks love AJ, right? Well, AJ Styles was on that talent roster and one of the guys that Bob was concerned about. I'm not saying anything about AJ Styles and steroids or pain meds. I'm saying he was concerned about that young talent, that next generation coming up, because he saw what happened to his generation. His generation was 2 generations before my generation, and my generation being on the road full time in Memphis, Tennessee, USWA, wrestling 8 times a week for 6 weeks, and then having one Sunday off and then back to the road. 50%. More than 50% of the young men that I was wrestling with in that territory are dead and gone now, mostly due to issues from the lifestyle, the lack of education with training, the lack of education of wellness. And that's a sad, sad thing because I'm only 58 years old. Most of these guys didn't see 50 if they did see 50. Brickhouse Brown, well done. Billy Joe Travis, Mr. Chris Champion. There's so many more, but those are the guys just off the top of my head. Mike Awesome, and yes, wellness encompasses the mental health as well, So here's a little background about Bob Backland, and maybe I can change some hearts and minds, even though I'm coming at you with my guns blazing, because I'm very protective over Bob Backland. And here's one of the things I want to tell you in regards to Bob Backland. When we finally went on the road and did live events and a couple of pay-per-views on the road with TNA Impact Wrestling. There were 3 individuals that found their way to the gym, to the pool, that were on the talent roster at the hotels when we were on the road. Bob Backlund, Kurt Angle, and me. Always. Anytime we went on the road. No other talent. We did. And that's when I tell you about Bob Backlund. There was a time when we did that whole hour TV taping, and Bob Backlund did the whole hour walking the steps forwards and backwards, and they were 5 stairs. And he must have been 60 years old at the time, maybe older. But anyway, love it if Bob Backlund could get his hands on some of these smarks and just handle things the way his era handled things. They would really shut him up and, like Sheiky said, God bless his soul, humble him, teach him respect. I don't think Bob would have gone off the deep end as much as Sheiky and actually penetrate someone and break their back to teach them respect. But Bob would have taught him respect. From being homeless and sleeping in his car, eating tuna from a can, and having to defeat up to 9 fans from the crowd before the matches each night to keep his spot on the card, Bob Backlund faced harsh challenges at the start of his career. However, with a positive mental attitude, grit, keyword man, and unbridled determination, he became a true gentleman and a champion in every sense of the word. And if you know Bob Backlund, you'll understand the fact that he is still that way. Many fans know him or know the name Bob Backlund. But for the younger fans, or the younger generation, it's more likely that the heel character portrayed in the mid-'90s is remembered all over the All-American boy that Vince McMahon Sr. handpicked to become his WWF champion. That heel gimmick was just ridiculous, and that was Vince Jr., and I don't know. I think Vince is possibly projecting some of his issues onto Bob from, that era, the era that actually taught Vince Jr. the wrestling industry. It's just ridiculous, but here we go again. So, the All-American boy, once revered by countless fans, became conspicuously old-fashioned, rejected, and mostly forgotten, by the new generation. His clean-cut, ever-present babyface persona was no longer connecting with the fans, so in turn, he needed to emerge to teach them a lesson, and it just wasn't very well received. It had nothing to do with Bob. I don't think that they planned on drawing money with that. I think it was mostly for Vince Sr. or maybe someone on the quote-unquote creative team's entertainment, Backlund, although a fascinating character in itself, was a far cry from the sedulous, unwearied wrestler who, with uncompromising ethical morals, he has morals, went against some of the best talent that wrestling has ever seen. This list includes superstar Billy Graham, Don the Rock Morocco, Greg Valentine, Jimmy Snuka, Ken Patera, Sergeant Slaughter, Paul Orndorff, Harley Race, Hogan, Koloff. The list goes on, and including, and we'll end up with just saying Stan Hansen, Mick Bockwinkel, Ric Flair. You see? When you talk about champions with actual wrestling skills, look no further than Bob Backlund. He's known to work almost any match while making his opponents look like $1 million in the process. And this is Piper, guys. Piper is a shooter who never, ever, ever didn't say what was on his mind, rest his soul. He corroborates Backlund's greatness in Backlund's highly recommended biography. I'll go ahead and put a link to Backlund's biography in the description. This is Piper. The competition in those days was heavy, man, and Bob Backlund managed to cut through all of that, work his way to the top. The honest way to become a world champion, then stay there for almost 6 years. 6 years was a lifetime in our sport. For almost 6 years, he was the world champion of the most lucrative territory in wrestling, filling the biggest buildings night after night. And guys, sometimes twice a night. That's not even put on here. Mr. USA, Tony Atlas, who doesn't like anybody, was also a witness of the success brought on by Backland to the business. When I was in the WWF, Bob was champion because he sold out buildings. If nobody was paying to see Bob Backland, he would have never gotten the belt. And if people didn't keep paying to see Bob Backland wrestle, he would have never kept the belt. Bob Backland was a true gentleman and a champion in every sense of the word. He was the epitome of what a champion should be. He was and is a credit to our business. Most of all, though, Bobby has a heart of gold. And he does. How can you not have integrity? And he has integrity. The believability factor, because it was a shoot. Harley Race had only praise for Backland. Let me tell you about Bobby. When I went into the garden to wrestle him, I went out to the ring first. When he came through the curtain, I don't think I've ever heard a crowd pop louder for anyone. I don't think that I wrestled anyone anywhere in the world who was more over than Bobby at the Garden. Race continued. He was an athlete, a great wrestler, a person that people just loved to love. Backland was the ultimate fucking baby face. Now, Harley, he talks like he talks, but you'll see in most interviews, Harley is a consummate professional. For him to F-bomb, that's really heartfelt, and I'm sure you smarks all love Harley because he bred talent like Moxley, for example, But anyway, Bob Backland and his rough beginnings in the tri-state area. Before being spotted at the 7th Street Gym in Minneapolis, Minnesota, I know that place, by trainer Eddie Sharkey, ironically the first person that planted the seed for Backland to become a pro wrestler was none other than superstar Billy Graham. And this was in the spring of '72 at a YMCA in Fargo, North Dakota. Ironically, because 7 years later, Bob became the WWF World Champion by defeating Superstar in what some would say at the peak of his run, or at least when Graham was still a huge draw. And Graham, we all know, you can say what you want about the late great Superstar Billy Graham, man, but he changed the industry's pace, Much before that incredible evening, Backland began his career in the Tri-States territory, headed by Leroy McGurk, who was blind, comprised of Oklahoma, Arkansas, and Louisiana. Backland's mode of transportation was a 1968 green Chevy Impala that he bought for $200. He headed off to Baton Rouge, Louisiana, for the not-so-glorious life of a professional wrestler, where he cut his teeth in the territory system of the National Wrestling Alliance. This is something that bothers me, is you Indians think that you pay your dues because you shoot off in a car like a bunch of morons to go work some other moron in another state and say, see, I'm paying my dues, I'm cutting my teeth. Bob did it every night. And there's so much more to the story. Yeah, it's really easy to go out and do that stuff when you live in mom and dad's basement, or that's your backup plan if something goes awry, And going out there and working with your pals and working with other Indians, you're not cutting your teeth, you're not learning stuff. You're just glorified yarders, grown-up glorified yarders. His first match was against Ron Starr. It was pretty green back then as well, but who did have later success in various territories in the NWA, twice becoming the junior world champion. Okay, God bless. There's more there about him, but let's talk about fucking Backland. Backland's first match didn't go so smoothly. He wound up getting caught in the ropes as he entered the ring. He was thoroughly lost the entire time and was laughed at by the fans in several instances. The good news, he did get paid. The bad news was it wasn't what he'd hoped for. Now remember, he left his home to learn the territory in a $200 car. Backland recounts, I pulled out the envelope and thought about what I was going to do with the money. First, of course, I was going to have to pay for my lodging at the Sheraton. I thought about treating myself to a good steak, a dinner to celebrate, making it as a pro. And then I thought about sending some home to my parents to help with my younger sister, Mary. When Backland opened the envelope, he shockingly discovered that he had been paid $5 for his first match. Now, this is after all the training and the fact that he is and was a legitimate wrestler. He recalls the dire straits he found himself in. With no money to get a room at even the cheapest motel in the area, I found myself 1,000 miles away from home and effectively homeless. I bought a couple of cans of tuna and a can opener, and that became dinner. Backland needed to find a place to sleep, so he found a distressing solution. I drove around and eventually found the church parking lot, pulled in. With nowhere else to go, I curled up and went to sleep in the trunk of my car. Now, I left home at 15 years old, okay? And I have been in some shit before I got to the pro wrestling industry. And I'll be honest with you, Bob, you wasted money on the opener. There are many, many ways you can get a can open without having to purchase an opener. But I get it. Bob Backland didn't really get any help from anybody because he didn't know anyone in the territory and lacked a permanent address. The little money he had needed had to be used for food, because if he would have lost any weight or muscle mass, guys, he wouldn't have been in the territory. At night he slept with an old wooden bat to protect himself, and there were a lot of gangs that roamed the area at night back then in '68 Impala. In retrospect, those first few weeks were rock bottom for me, Backland somberly admits. Now, if you don't want to give up at that point, and you guys talk about paying dues and make yourselves think that you're some sort of veteran because you wrestled once or twice a month for 10 years with some other idiot, you're not worth my time. Backland resorted to exercise to keep his spirits up. I went to a local gym every day, and I trained as hard as I could, and I washed up in their bathroom. Working out put my mind at rest and gave me a release. On the street, when I was a youngin', we used to call that a whore bath, With all his earthly possessions in the car and barely able to sleep at night because of the stifling Louisiana summer nights, where the air felt oppressive and hard to breathe, Backland began to have serious doubts about whether he made the right choice pursuing a career in wrestling. For the most part, he was paying his dues by jerking the curtain. That means working the opening match, guys. That means that your ring music is the national anthem. Doing the job for wrestlers who he claims wouldn't have even been able to score a point on him if it was an amateur bout. Now, that's got to be a whole nother mindset that I don't even understand. The fact that he could probably tie up entire locker rooms in knots, but still humbled himself, for the love of the industry, respect to the industry, and integrity by giving his word. Backland had won the NCAA Division II championships at the 190-pound weight class in '71 with North Dakota State University, and placed a very respectable 5th the following year when he moved up in weight. Let me ask you guys a question. How many guys on top of the industry today can bark that kind of amateur background? And that's part of the reason why they need so many gimmicks to be over, is because they're just not believable at their core. Under Lee Maury McGurk and Jake Grizzly Smith, the father of Jake Roberts and Sam Houston, we all know that scumbag, was the booker for the Tri-States territory. There were marks. Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and call them marks. And I'm not going to go into the definition because I don't ever call a fan a mark. What I call a mark is 2/3 of you idiots. Backland, with his clean-cut baby-faced look to him, was not intimidating to them. But this fell right into Grizzly's plan, because he knew Backland, with a superb amateur wrestling background, was more than capable of handling himself. So night after night, he wrestled the marks before the matches started. Oh, and forget about air conditioning. Listen to this. Once the bleachers and the seats were full, the temperature rose by 15 degrees. And yes, when those bodies get in there, oh my God. And the air smelled like a combination of body odor, sewerage in those old-ass buildings, yes, stale beer, and on some nights it was hard not to throw up, except that I didn't have much in my stomach anyway. Yeah, you can't really barf up tuna once it's been in there for an hour, Bob. According to Backland, one night in Lafayette, Louisiana, he wrestled 9 people straight, picked from the crowd before the matches began. Failure to subdue and defeat these people was not an option. Yeah, he would have been fired. As Backland explains, if you were a professional wrestler and got manhandled by a drunk mark who came out of the crowd in jeans and cowboy boots, it would hurt the legitimacy of the business. In the eyes of the fans, your career, at least in that territory, would be over. And I'm sure it would have gotten into the magazines, and that would have been over too, all over the world. For the entire time I worked the Tri-States territory, I ate tuna fish out of a can, drank as much water as I could get at the gym or the public library, and lived in my car. Now, you see what I'm saying? He was doing this just to keep his job in the territory, to learn the craft curtain jerking. And you guys have paid your dues, you're paying your dues, you're a veteran, you're cutting your teeth, whatever. But through all this, Backland's positive mental attitude and remembering Eddie Sharkey's lessons helped him through the rough beginning. Now, you smart guys, you guys, girls, with intelligence and common sense, well, listen to this, because these people like Bob Backland draw you a fucking roadmap. I was out there to learn the craft in the small civic arenas and gyms in these small southern backwater towns were the classrooms of our profession. Hey, sounds just like the Tennessee territory when I broke in. I was polite, respectful, never complained, and always willing to do whatever was asked of me. Hear, hear, Mr. Backland. As time went by, he began being booked for 15-minute draws. Some of the house shows, and was allowed to call some spots, show a few moves, and even earned a couple of wins. And that's only because, let's go back to this, I'm going to read it to you again. I don't care if you're bored. I need to hear it and be reminded. And there's so many of you that want to call yourselves wrestlers or prospective wrestlers that need to hear it again. I was out there to learn the craft. And the small civic arenas and gyms in these small southern backwater towns were the classrooms of our profession. I was polite, respectful, never complained, and always willing to do whatever was asked of me. You know, I can't stress that enough. Some of you guys need to get a tattoo on your heads that say that shit, so when you look in the mirror, you're reminded. Meeting Terry Funk, the end of the beginning. The first meaningful contact Bob Backland made was when Terry Funk came into the territory to main event in one of the towns. When asked how he was doing, Backland told Terry that he was learning but was getting pretty run down from living in his car. Now let me tell you, there's nothing wrong with Terry Funk as a human being. Terry Funk is a very great human being. And Terry Funk as another man of honor, another man of integrity that protected this business with every inch of his being. And if you were an asshole, Terry Funk would make sure everybody knew it. He would not give you the time of day. Before the conversation ended, Terry gave Backland his phone number to call him when he was ready for a change. A couple of weeks later, Grizzly let the boys know that Terry needed some guys to do some jobs on TV in Amarillo, Texas, and of course Backland didn't hesitate to offer up his services. Anxious to explore something different, I made the long hot drive from Shreveport to Amarillo. That set in motion a long chain of events that one after the next would ultimately take me all the way to the World Championship. Bob Backland, less of the old schoolers before wrestling went mainstream. The career of Backland spanned over 30 years and saw him become a hero to numerous fans across the globe. He always represented wrestling with dignity, honor, and held the sport in the highest regard. Backland was a throwback, a line demarcation that separated the last of the old school style wrestlers in the new era to come. You know, I've always thought that new era stuff is just bullshit. Let's call it what it is. You need all these other gimmicks and stuff, a lot of them, because there's nothing believable about them. In many ways, this change in the philosophy of how the sport would be presented was ushered by Vince Jr.'s vision for how he wanted wrestling to be presented. A fellow named Hulk Hogan would be the executor of said vision and push old school wrestling led by Backland into a corner, as further explained by George the Animal Steele. I loved Jim Myers, guys. I loved George the Animal Steele. And I used to bring him in for a lot of stuff and just Also, he's agented my matches when I worked at WWE. But another one you guys just never took seriously. Explained by George Animal Steel. Once Hogan had the belt, it was Hogan's show and screw everybody else, Steel continued. Junior had a vision for where he wanted the thing to go. It was all about Hogan. So our old school wrestling business blossomed into a totally different business, what I call the cartoon area. According to Roddy Piper, in the blink of an eye, relatively speaking, the business changed, and the great technicians, the guys who knew how to use psychology to get the people and who were formerly the cornerstones of the business became dinosaurs, and a lot of that stuff was intentional, by the way. But I want to say, and I'll say it at the end, I hope I don't forget what my thinking is. My thinking is that there's more room, there's always room for this type of wrestling, the wrestling I'm talking about. Roddy Piper also strongly opposed the transition of favoring wrestlers such as Hogan over Backland. It was a hot shot. It made money. I'd like to see the books, though, to be honest with you. Vince Sr.'s books during Bob's 6 years and Vince McMahon's books, I'm talking about live gate attendance during Junior's years and Hogan's years as a champ. Vinny put a great technical wrestler like Bobby in mothballs in favor of what he thought was more entertaining kind of match, animated by the characters that they created and could market. Now let's talk about that for 1 second. I just want to bring up a point. These guys don't even own their own names today, in most cases. Back then, these guys meant something. Vince would bring them in, i.e. Honky Tonk Man, the Bushwhackers, They kept their names. They were there because they had built their names out there in the world. Now we look back on it and see that the wrestlers of this generation don't have the training and psychology for how to tell a story in the ring like Bobby Backland did. So they have to do all kinds of song and dance to try to keep the thing going instead of just having one man who knew the art. And this is from Piper, and if I'm not mistaken, most of you smarks at least like Piper. I mean, I see you smarks all over the place trying to recreate, or saw you for a while trying to recreate the promo with him and Snuka, you idiots. Professional wrestling exploded into $1 billion worldwide industry, but with the new cross-culture exposure and evolution into a pop culture phenomenon, the once passable sport evolved into a farce. Yeah, man, that's some sad shit. When it came to the dethroning of Bob Backlund in December of '83, the Iron Sheik is certainly proud of having been the man to do so. God bless Sheiky. Again, my friend, even if in the history books he is considered transitional champion who held the title for only 28 days, that was the close of a sentence. Even if he is the man who held the title for only 28 days, it could be perceived as a transitional champion. Once again, another man who was just unbelievable out there and could break your arm if he wanted to. 6 year, nobody beat Bob Backlund, Sheiky Baby Thunders, referring to the man he dethroned for the title. I beat him at most famous arena, Madison Square Garden. Without Iron Sheik, there would be no Hulkamania. And that's what people don't want to look at today. You guys don't understand the term legacy or even give a shit of what legacy means. You know what I mean? I just don't understand it. I don't understand. Like, I can ask these young guys, what's your nationality? They don't know. I think, which is ridiculous, If you don't know where you came from, how can you figure out where you're going? Okay? And just so everybody knows now, I'm going to go ahead and wrap this thing up and say once and for all. When I worked at TNA Impact or TNA Wrestling, I made it my business to know every damn thing that was going on. One of the things I knew for certain was that we were getting $75,000 per hour, and TV's worth more now, but $75,000 per hour from Spike TV, which is part of Viacom. Okay? They lost their deal for many, many reasons with Spike TV, and one of them was because it was just horrifying. It was horrifying wrestling. It was horrifying, and those people were dirtbags. And I told everybody then that it was only a matter of time before whatever happened, and I told you guys exactly how it was going to happen, to the tune of where then, when I had my blog going until about 2010, maybe later, I was getting 1,000 uniques a day. And then some of the haters were actually starting to turn my way and say, Jesus Christ, you're Nostradamus. I went back and looked, and you called this in your blog a year ago, and what I said was going to happen was going to happen because of what I knew inside there. So TNA Wrestling, the most foolish thing they did is it cost them more than they were making just in talent to do 2 hours of television, and all they did was just hire WWE's already established talent. Now, I would say it at the time, and it wasn't a dig on anybody, but the bottom line to it is this. If Vince let someone go, there's a reason. For, in particular, Kurt Angle, because it was the responsible thing to do because of Kurt's injury and pain level, okay? Vince had gotten everything that he could out of anybody that they hired. And how do you build a company out that? We're supposed to build a company. We're supposed to build a company by creating new stars, create new household names, make Samoa Joe and AJ Styles household names. Now, go ahead and watch your favorite internet morons matches today. Let's say, I don't even know the guy, but Hangman Page. And let's go back and watch Samoa Joe versus AJ Styles when they were his age. These guys were unbelievably believable, in addition to the cutie pie bullshit that you guys love so much in the high spots, etc. Look at the fact that AJ is making more money now, in the last part of his career, and he doesn't have to put himself in harm's way, But anyway, so they lose the deal with Viacom, with Spike TV, for good reason. They didn't deserve that deal to begin with, and it never warranted that kind of money that they were getting. They signed on with a new station, I can't remember who owns it, called Destination America. Destination America was a news station, and they were taking their shot, much like Spike TV, which was supposed to be television for men or geared toward men, was trying to do. And one of the mainstays of their programming at the time was supposed to be total nonstop action, or actually they sold Impact Wrestling. They were trying to get away from the quote-unquote TNA. And they were getting $30,000 per hour, which was still enough to create some new stars and at least stay afloat. Well, their egos were so gigantic, they always treated it like it was a second-rate deal, And the reason they lost that deal after 1 year, and this was a station with money backing them at the time, a venture that was wanted to grow and build with TNA Wrestling, okay? They lost the deal because of the fact that the footage that they were sending them was primarily from Europe because they couldn't draw in the United States, and they said, I don't understand, check your contract, we are Destination America. They wanted them to at least tape their wrestling in America, and they wanted at the time a more traditional style of wrestling, i.e. with believability. Now, in closing, look at all the new talent WWE NXT has hired over the last 2 years, okay? It's going to take a while for these people to develop. And now let's look at the guys on top that can wrestle, that have amateur sports, and in particular, off the top of my head, I'm talking about the tag team of the Alpha Academy, Otis and Gable, right? Chad Gable. That's what your business is going back to, understand? Now, Gable and Otis are entertaining, but the number one thing that they got, once they start wrestling and the things they do in that ring, once they get past the gaga and the entertainment part, they can rip your head off or tie you in knots. The choice is theirs. That's what people want to see. So I appreciate all this, that, and the other thing, but at the end of the day, it is getting back to the traditional style of wrestling. And in no way, shape, or form can someone call themselves a wrestling fan if they think it's ridiculous to make fun. And let's face it, if you insecure little idiots or internet marks were treated the way Bob Backland was treated by you idiots and the things you laughed at, you'd be crying, bully this, bully that. And God only knows if you would be able to find somebody to give you the lawsuits, but you would have been stuck in mommy's basement even longer. You know, that's just ridiculous. Do I hate people? I don't hate people, but I certainly hate what they do, and I will certainly hate knowing Bob Backlund and the type of person that he is, and the history of pro wrestling with Bob Backlund in it. I hate that there's anywhere in the world that young men think that that shit's cute or funny, man. You know? And at the end of the day, keep doing what you're doing. I'm sure you're reaping what you sow wherever you are. All right, guys, if you want to let me have it in the comments, let me have it in the comments. I can take it, you know? Also, if you want to support Premier Pro Wrestling, check the links in the description. Premier Pro Wrestling on Patreon and our merchandise shop, Premier Pro Wrestling and Pro Wrestling Tees. And I'm also going to go ahead and put Bob's Wikipedia link in the description as well.